In a world where trust is a luxury, I found myself trusting a man who could be the very definition of danger. His silver eyes hold a promise of safety, but his dark past whispers threats in my ear. Chapter 7. This is ridiculous. I shook my head in disbelief. Maybe his friend was just exaggerating. Who's this friend of yours anyway? How would he know who these men are? Elliot clenched his jaw. His name's Fallon. He has access to the identity history database. A history of what? What does that even mean? It sounded awfully sketchy. Never mind my sources. Nora, just trust that they're accurate. He paced around the porch some more, hands fisted by his sides. We need to leave now. We can't just get up and leave. They'll obviously know something is wrong. I whispered as the back of my neck began heating up due to the uneasiness I felt. Well, we can't stay either, Elliot Whisper yelled. That is already packing up in our room. We'll just say she has a family emergency and we need to cut our trip short. My hand unconsciously raised to my hair, my fingers running through them as I tried to think of a better way to leave. We needed a stronger argument. If those men are who Elliot claims they are, then they're smart, they'll know something is wrong and we can risk them knowing that. We need to think of something better. I bit the inside of my cheek. We don't have time, Elliot yelled, now completely frustrated. You need to go get Ariel and take her to your room. Tell her everything when you're positive they're as far away from hearing distance as possible. I'll take care of Noah and Seth. I nodded my head, straightening my hair by brushing my fingers through them quickly and taking a deep breath. Act natural, Elliot mumbled. My eyes shot up to his. Like the way you were back in there. He rolled his eyes. I was freaking out. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. It's not every day we get us involved with one of the biggest mobs in our country. We'll be okay, I reassured him. He stared at me for the longest 5 seconds, before hesitantly nodding his head, as if trying to convince the both of us that we will somehow be. I turned on my heels and headed back to the kitchen, taking a deep breath. When I was close enough, Seth's deep laugh could be heard and my stomach dropped. I pushed past the doorway and made my way to my stool that was now between Ariel and Avia, and I tried my hardest to avoid eye contact, glaring holes into my plate. Are you all right? Avia leaned close to whisper his question to me. I nodded my head, giving him a quick glance and smiling for impact. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I turned to my best friend, interrupting her conversation with Vincent. She looked at me with bright, gleaming eyes, and my heart tore a little imagining how hurt she would be by leaving a guy she had finally started to genuinely like. Can you give me a hand with something? Sure thing. She smiled brightly. I hopped off my stool and as I was about to leave, Avia gave me a weird look. Everything okay? He repeated, unconvinced by my earlier answer. I tried to control the erratic beating of my heart and my shallow breaths. I was on the verge of a breakdown as I was engulfed by the fear of the unknown, and acting natural in such a case was a task much more challenging than I imagined. Everything is good. I forced a tight smile. He was not convinced, but he decided to let it go. His suspicious gaze left me on edge and I was worried he'd find out what's really going on. I grabbed Ariel's hand and rushed past the kitchen doorway, dragging her towards the stairs. Whoa, calm down. What's going on? Ariel asked. I bit the inside of my cheek, glancing behind her shoulder to see Elliot slowly walking towards the kitchen, his back straight and chin held high. He gave me a quick look and nodded once, encouraging me to continue on with our agreement. Ariel glanced between us and raised a brow, chuckling slightly. Okay, I am officially creeped out. I dragged her to our floor, then to our rented room. I fumbled with the key, my fingers too sweaty to be able to insert it into the keyhole on first try. Elliot just found out something huge, and we need to leave now. Oh, why? She exclaimed in disappointment. and I resisted the urge to cringe when her voice echoed in the small space. I shoved her into our room, then closed the door and locked it again. You can never be too safe. What the hell is going on? Nora, Ariel demanded, her frown deepening. Elliot had his doubts about Vincent, so he called in a friend last night. And those men aren't who we think they are. They're very dangerous and we need to leave now. I crouched on the floor and unzipped my bag, grabbing at my belongings and shoving them inside. Who are they? Ariel's voice was low and I could sense the fear in it. My lips parted so I could answer her question, but I hesitated, not wanting to scare her too much. Nora, who is Vincent? I bit the inside of my cheek and stood tall, turning around to face Ariel's wide blue eyes. They're members of the mob, I whispered. The words sounded so far unleaving my mouth that I had to resist the urge to smile at how ridiculous the whole situation felt. Ariel stared at me for a long time, processing my words. What? She suddenly chuckled, which didn't really surprise me, but my features remained serious, and her laugh subdued. You're joking, right? I gulped and slowly shook my head. This is serious. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I reached out for her shivering hand and gave it a tight squeeze. Elliot won't allow anything bad to happen to us, but we need to leave ASAP. Ariel's eyes remained wide in shock as she forced her head to nod in understanding. I pushed her towards her bag and she began packing up, shoving her clothes that were scattered all around into her bag. This is insane. What the hell was Seth thinking bringing us here? She exclaimed, and I shushed her, afraid someone would hear us behind our door. Seth doesn't know. Of course he wouldn't put us in such danger. I scolded. I zipped my bag and rushed to the bathroom to change into a pair of jeans and a more fitting top. I grabbed my sandals and quickly put them on. Glancing into the room, I saw Ariel pulling her hair into a messy ponytail, already changed into a pair of white shorts and a loose top. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. She nodded and grabbed our bags. What are we gonna tell them? She asked me once I unlocked the door. That Bella's having a family emergency. We stepped out of our rooms and a second later, the door to our left also unlocked. Seth stepped outside, his hair disheveled and in a complete mess, with Noah following behind. Noah's jaws were clenched tightly and there was Dora's face. When their eyes met us they softened a bit, and they came rushing towards us. Seth placed his hands on Ariel's shoulders and gave them a tight squeeze. You're ready? He asked and she frantically nodded her head. He reached down to grab the bags from her hands and hurried towards the stairs, Ariel following behind. Noah's arm wrapped around my waist and he pulled me towards him, his green eyes peering into mine. I've got you. And I gulped down the lump growing in my throat. I know. Noah. I'm fine. I pushed against his chest but his hand tightened on my hip, and he shook his head. Stay by my side, he commanded, and I hesitantly nodded. Guys, come on, Seth called out and we rushed towards the stairs. When we arrived at the lobby, Elliot and Bella were already speaking to Mrs. Patterson behind the desk, handing her over the keys and mentioning Bella's younger sister. We started heading towards them when we were suddenly stopped by a loud door slam. Our heads snapped to the kitchen doorway to see Xavier stepping out, his frown deepening at the sight of our luggage. Leaving so soon. A second later Vincent and Levi stepped out, their features turning from playful to confused within seconds. Where are y'all headed to? Vincent asked. Elliot took a step forward, his jaw ticking. Had to cut our trip short. Family emergency. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Xavier's voice boomed through the lobby. My gaze remained on the shiny tiles, but the back of my neck was heating up as I could feel his intense gaze settled on my face, demanding that I look up. But I couldn't. He would find all the answers behind my eyes. Elliot answered, shortly. Vincent's voice then rang. Why do you all have to leave for it? The suspicion evident behind his voice. Because we're family. We support one another in difficult times. I'm sure you understand how important that is. Noah replied. I glanced through my lashes to see Vincent nod. Certainly. Very well then. Elliot began. Gentlemen, it was a pleasure. He rested his hand on Bella's lower back and guided her away towards the doors. He looked at Noah and motioned towards the car. Noah's hand trailed down my arm towards my own that was clutching Ariel and I's room key. I opened my palm and gave him the key, which he took towards Mrs. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Who wasn't entirely oblivious towards the tension growing in the room. Thank you for your hospitality. He offered her a warm smile and turned back to us, grabbing some of our bags and motioning for me to walk ahead of him. Nora. My heart dropped to my stomach as Xavier's warm velvety voice echoed to my ears. I turned to glance at him, his hard silver eyes holding a promise behind them. I hope to see you again. Noah opened his mouth to reply, but I beat him to it. Goodbye, Xavier. I turned around and followed Ariel towards the cars. Chapter 8. The shrill ringing of the doorbell sounded through our apartment, and I peeked from around the kitchen counter to see our white wooden door rattle as a knock followed shortly after. I quickly dried my hands on the towel I kept on the counter and stalked towards the front door. As Ariel's gaze remained fixed on the TV, unbothered, I didn't even have to check through the peephole. Noah's casual visits have become a routine. I unlocked my door and pulled it open, revealing a grinning Noah clutching onto a fully packed paper bag. Hey, Noah. Stepping to the side to let him in. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Princess. He set the bag on my kitchen counter, standing tall and stretching his amount. Brought you some groceries for tonight. I closed the door and immediately locked it behind Noah's orders. Tonight. Confused. You didn't get my text. I shook my head. No, I forgot to pay this month's phone bill. It was due 2 days ago. I chuckled. Oh, how much we've begun to rely on our phones. I hadn't checked my texts in 2 days and I already feel like I've missed a month's worth of news. Our conversation caught Ariel's interest, and her gaze moved from the show playing on TV to our position by the open kitchen. Her eyes widened in sudden realization. I forgot to tell you. We're having a movie marathon tonight. We are? Well, that was news to me. Well, Noah invited himself and Elliot and Bella for a movie night at our place. Ariel rolled her eyes, getting back to the show on TV. I turned to glower at Noah, the nerve this guy has. Noah chuckled nervously, his hand coming up to rub the back of his neck sheepishly. To be fair, I did consider my own apartment first, but yours is bigger and cleaner. I walked over to the brown bag and peeked inside, seeing all kinds of random grocery. And what is up with all these random foods? I wondered, rummaging through the boxes. Well, I got some spaghetti and tomato sauce for dinner, and the snacks are for during the movie, Noah explained. I rummaged some all through the groceries to find several bags of salted chips, marshmallow, and pretzels. Well, how sweet of you. That's me. Ever the sweetest. Noah sighed as he flopped down on a couch. How've you all been? Good. Great. He eyed Ariel and I saw spicy Ousley, and I rolled my eyes. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Other than the fact that we're being babysat every single day, he clicked his tongue in disapproval. Nora, you know we have to take... I had to cut him off before he trailed any further. Precautions. Yeah, I know. I unintentionally snapped a bit too harshly. His eyes widened with his mouth still open and frozen mid-sentence. I sighed and ran a hand through my entire hair, a nervous habit groan. It's been an entire week. Noah, if anything was going to happen, it would have happened by now. We can't live the rest of our lives on guard because we spent a single day with a possible gang member. His jaw ticked as he bit back whatever response he had in mind. Ariel clicked her tongue. She's right. You know. Noah snapped his head towards her disapprovingly. I'm bored out of my mind and I will certainly not spend the rest of my vacation huddled up in my apartment, watching TV all day, just because you guys are too paranoid to let us out. No, we won't. I agreed with Ariel. Noah's jaw ticked as he eyed the both of us disapprovingly. Just give it some more time. Ariel groaned loudly in annoyance. How much longer? It's already been one hell of a depressing week. His fists were clenched into fist by his sides as he stood from the couch. His eyes snapped to mine, as if silently communicating a message with me. I'll leave you now to rest. He suddenly spoke. It's going to be a long night. He forced a tight smile. I sighed but nodded anyway, watching Noah walk towards the door and unlock it. He glanced behind his shoulder before leaving. Lock up behind me, he demanded. Hours later, I was surfing for the newest movies available on Netflix, suggesting some every once in a while and receiving differing votes each time. Well, we need to decide on something. Anything but romance. Ariel groaned. I've watched them all. Of course she has. What if we go with a classic? I suggested. Bella nodded. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I shrieked when I came across one of my all-time favorites, Homefront. Although not exactly a classic, I'd never grow tired of Jason Statham's heart, touching fatherly love in that movie. Yes, no, I exclaimed from the kitchen. I turned to the rest. Elliot shrugged and Ariel mumbled an I guess. I grinned cheerfully. Homefront. Noah then walked into the living room with a big tray carrying 5 bowls of his special spaghetti recipe. And dinner's ready, he announced. Noah went around handing a bowl with a fork to each person in the room, before settling beside me on the couch. Bella got comfortable snuggling into Elliot's side, while Ariel clutched onto her blanket as she draped herself over one entire couch. Start the damn movie. Ariel grumbled. She was extra grumpy tonight. Hit the light. I ordered Noah, who got up to switch the lights off then returned to his seat. The lights dimmed and I reached out for my bowl, wasting no time and digging into the savory goods. Around an hour in, Ariel's phone chimed and Noah aggressively shushed her, to which she flipped him on. I chuckled as I watched her unlock her phone, reading whatever had popped up on her screen. Her glassy eyes suddenly widened as she frantically read over the screen over and over again. Her reaction unusual. Her head snapped up and her eyes locked on mine. She stared for a couple seconds, an odd emotion swirling behind her eyes. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I mouthed. She looked around the room, noticing that everyone was engrossed with the action displayed on the screen. She motioned with her head towards my bedroom and I nodded. Ariel got up from her seat gradually, walking towards my bedroom. No one noticed her movements. When the gunshot sounded through the speakers, I took the distraction as my cue to get up and follow her. What's the matter? I walked in on Ariel pacing around my room, her phone clutched in her hands. I completely forgot that I messed up, she exclaimed. I shushed her and grabbed her tense shoulders, telling her to breathe and tell me what happened. Instead of replying, she turned her phone screen so I could see what was on it. It was a text message. Hey Ariel. What's up? VV. Who's V? I looked up at Ariel with a questioning gaze. Her eyes were wide as saucers. I gulped. It couldn't be. No, she nodded her head. I gave Vincent my number when you were out of the kitchen. I totally forgot about that. I gasped. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I scolded. He could easily track your phone. You don't think I realize that? She exclaimed, her chest heaving up and down. I pressed my lips together, thinking of a solution when my door was suddenly aggressively shoved open and a seething Elliot stepped inside. "You did what?" he yelled. Chapter 9. Ariel gazed down at her shattered phone broken-heartedly. The second Elliot walked into my room after overhearing our conversation, he snatched Ariel's phone from her hands and smashed it into the floor, stepping over it continuously until it had become a mush. Even went to the lengths of taking out her SIM card and breaking it in half. "Don't you think this is a bit too much?" Ariel groaned, rolling her eyes, which only angered Elliot further. He snapped his head toward her direction, his eyes glazing over. "No, Ariel. Even with all of this, they could still end up finding you." He ran a hand through his messy hair, ruffling it up even further. "How could you forget that you gave your number away? How dumb do you have to be?" "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilbe, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilbe, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I jumped in, noticing that truly Elliot was getting way over his head. "She forgot. It happens. We'll just watch out for ourselves and hopefully nothing will go wrong," I suggested, hoping it would put him a little to rest. But boy was I wrong. He chuckled humorlessly. "Watch out for yourselves. And how exactly will you watch out for you? Will you watch out for your mob in all the goddamn states is involved? Just the North," Ariel mumbled. Again, Elliot snapped his head her way. "Oh yeah, 'cause you know about the mobs better than I do," he spit sarcastically. I raised my hands in the air to quieten them down. "This is getting out of hand. Elliot, seriously, I appreciate you and your protectiveness, but you need to calm the hell down. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." I watched him pace around the room in complete distress, rubbing the small stubble growing on his face. "Noah is staying with you tonight." He pointed to Ariel. "She didn't exactly complain, since she lived for sleepovers and movie nights. Although I think we all knew this sleepover was not going to be like the usual." Elliot shuffled some more in his place before turning and walking out of my bedroom. I looked at Ariel, gauging her reaction, and that's when I saw her slowly crack. Her eyes welled up. "I'm so sorry I put you through this. Nora, I should have been more careful." Her voice broke, and she covered her mouth with her shaky hand to muffle the sound. I shook my head violently, stalking towards her and pulling her in for an embrace. "No, Ariel, don't. You didn't realize your mistake and that's all right. Don't worry, we'll fix this. I promised, and I really hoped I wasn't giving the both of us false hope. I really hope we do find a way to fix this. Who the fuck do you think you are? Going behind my back and doing the exact thing I told you not to fucking do." His voice roared and echoed against the small walls, sending my heart into an erratic beating that I could hear drumming against my ears. My neck was growing hot in fear as he began approaching me, gradually, like a predator stalking its prey, which in every way was true. His large fist connected with the wall right beside my head, and this time I didn't hold my ground and I allowed the flinch to show. I jumped back into the wall, tearing up. After so long, he finally broke me. I was tired. My lips were fighting hard to push the words through my mouth, but my tongue was tied. His face moved closer until he was mere inches away from mine, his ragged breath hitting my face with every heavy exhale. I looked down at his neck, afraid of glancing into the thunderous look behind his glazed over eyes. "Don't you ever, not for 1 second, think that you can open your mouth to anyone about this. I will find you." And as much as I hated to admit it, I knew it was a promise he would never break. He would always find me. I finally gathered enough courage to look up into those ice, cold blue eyes of his. Only now they weren't the same. They were grey as striking, silver color. I gasped and stepped back further into the wall, if that was even possible, and locked eyes with the stranger, my heart falling to my stomach. Xavier stared back at me with the same rage. Before his expression transformed completely into spine, chilling smirk grazed his features. "I will always find you." I gasped and jerked awake, taking half of the sheet off with me as I leapt off the bed and onto my feet. My hand flew to my chest and I gripped the soft article of my shirt tightly between my fist. My chest heaving up, and I struggled to regain my calm. My bedroom door was suddenly shoved open as Noah burst through the door, his frantic eyes scanning the bedroom for any possible threats. I opened my mouth to speak, but the dryness had my tongue in a twist and I found myself standing in complete silence. When Noah's eyes settled on my distressed state, he rushed over to where I stood, his eyes widening in concern. "Nora, what's wrong?" Only a second later, Ariel barged in behind him. She gazed up between us lazily. "What's going on?" I shook my head, breathing through my nose and exhaling through my mouth. A technique I was taught reduces anxiety and calms your erratic heartbeat. I'm all right. It was just a bad dream." I sighed deeply. The back of my neck was now drenched in sweat. I grabbed a hair tie from off my nightstand and quickly pulled my hair up into a messy bun, allowing the back of my neck to cool off. Noah's hands went over to my arms, rubbing them in a soothing manner, and although I knew he meant well, feeling the texture of his rough hands on my skin only induced the strong, felt emotions of my nightmare. I stepped back from his touch. His hands dropped down to his sides as he asked in a low voice, "I thought you stopped having those dreams." I shook my head. "I did. It was just tonight. It's nothing," I assured him. Noah nodded his head but looked unconvinced. I got back in bed and pulled the tangled sheets in with me. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you up," I mumbled. Noah shook his head. "You've nothing to be sorry for. I wasn't sleeping anyway." I smiled appreciatively before his words registered. Glancing at the clock on my bedside table, I found that it was nearly 2:30. "Why are you still up?" "Just got caught up watching TV." His answer didn't seem sincere, but I let it slip and nodded reluctantly. "Would you like me to stay beside you?" I shook my head, about to decline his offer, but Ariel beat me to it. "I'll stay. I think this calls for a cuddle session." She grinned as she climbed into bed beside me. I chuckled but shook my head, pushing her crawling arm off of me. "I'm drenched in sweat. Trust me, you don't want to." She scrunched up her nose playfully, then laughed before her eyes softened a bit. She gazed into my eyes as if begging for honesty before asking, "But are you okay?" I gave her a reassuring smile. "I'm good. Promise." Noah smiled at our little encounter, then retreated towards the door. "If you need anything, I'll be in the living room." When he shut the door behind him, I noticed Ariel was staring at me for a while longer. When I met her eyes with a quizzical gaze, "Elliot will come by tomorrow. Again. I'm sure he'll come up with something smart that'll keep us safe." I frowned in confusion at first, until her words finally registered in my brain. "Oh no. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I shook my head. I wasn't worried about that. I referred back to our earlier conversation about Vincent. "Then what was your dream about?" she asked me, lying on my back and staring up at my plain white ceiling. It was just our earlier talk triggering some memories. I whispered. She nodded her head in understanding. "Only this time we have Elliot and Noah's annoying ass. And occasionally, Seth. They won't let anything go wrong." I smiled because I knew she was right. Our friends will always have our back. They gave an oath to be our protectors when we first met in college, and they aren't known for breaking their promises. I know they won't. Chapter 10. It felt like I had grown a tiny rose within the confines of my intestine. The bigger the petals grew and touched the walls of my stomach, the more the sparks ignited. It felt like a dozen wide, winged butterflies were hovering above that said flower, and they were cherishing its bloom by flapping their wings about within the confines of my body like they wanted to explode out of the cage and be set free. Every step that I took forward towards my local coffee shop only intensified the sensation I was currently experiencing. And no, it was not because of the coffee. Don't get me wrong. I live for iced coffee. But it's something I have every consecutive day. I grew pretty accustomed to it, so the excitement could not possibly be for that. And as much as I tried to shrug off the feeling, the distraction, the voice within my head yelling at me to run faster, I couldn't. The odd sensations were sending my mind into a frenzy, and I was on the verge of losing the last bit of my sanity. As I finally reached the familiar light, yellow-chipped wooden door, I reluctantly stretched out my hand to grab onto the knob. I took a minute to breathe in deeply, forcing my anxiety to rest and grounding myself to the present. Pushing the door open, I heard the familiar classic ding of the bells hanging above. The addictive aroma of freshly brewed coffee hit my senses instantaneously, and my heart suddenly warmed. As per usual, the place was packed. Yaya was the best coffee shop in town and has been around for longer than I can remember. It was fairly small but extremely cozy, with a hippie interior, design and subtle, warm colors. I followed my heart as it led me to the ordering counter. Luckily no one stood ahead of me in line, so I was quick to order my usual iced coffee with added vanilla, Ariel's caramel latte, and Noah's Americano. I don't know how he could drink that abominable mixture. I went for a taste once and couldn't rid of the coffee flavor on my tongue for 3 hours straight. As I reached into the back pocket of my jeans to retrieve my money, an arm extended by my right, offering the boy on the other side of the counter some cash. I snapped my head to the owner of the money and passed the muscular arm only to involuntarily gasp and take a step back. "I've got it," his deep voice informed the boy, who glanced at me for affirmation. When he didn't get a reaction because my widened eyes were still transfixed on the last man I expected to see, he shrugged and took the money, handing him back the change. His eyes finally snapped to my own and I deeply inhaled as those striking silvers pierced into my soul. A heart-warming smile grazed Xavier's features and he opened his mouth to speak. "Nora," he acknowledged, nodding once. I was at loss of words. What the hell was he doing here? I was tongue-tied. But the worst part of it all was that I couldn't tell what the heavy feeling tugging at my heartstrings stood for. Was it fear? Or relief? "How have you been?" When he took into account my shock. "What are you doing here?" I suddenly blurted out. Xavier grinned amused lie and looked down, bouncing on his legs. He looked so different than when I first met him. At the inn he was so confident as he stood tall, dominating and intimidating everyone around him with his powerful essence. Now, however, he looked almost nervous. I figured I'd give it a shot. He finally looked up, hope dancing behind my favorite feature of his eyes. Wait, did I just claim I have a favorite feature in Xavier? Give what a shot. "Your order's ready," the boy mumbled monotonously before going back to his work. I walked over to the receiving end and grabbed my drinks, picking some napkins and straws as well. Then I suddenly realized what happened earlier in my shocked state. Xavier paid for our order. I couldn't let him do that. I reached into the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out some cash, offering it to him. He glanced down at my hand, then raised a brow, giving me a look that basically screamed sarcastic. "Seriously?" I shook my head. "Thank you, but I can't make you pay for my drinks. They're not just for me. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilbe, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I watched him lick his lips, contemplating my answer for a second. "You can always pay me back later." I gulped. The last thing I wanted was to be indebted to any of Vincent's friends. I shook my head a bit too violently, causing some hair strands to fall onto my face. "No, I'd rather just get it over with now." An odd expression passed through Xavier's eyes, like my words struck him harder than they should have. He didn't reply as his gaze once again moved to the wooden floor. He fiddled a little with the expensive watch on his right wrist before finally looking up. "Would you like to have lunch with me?" he suddenly blurted out. My eyes widened at his forwardness. I was certainly not expecting that to come out of his mouth next. "That's what I'm here for." He took a step closer and the fresh scent of his cologne wafted through to my senses, dropping straight into my stomach as the butterflies yet again battled with the blossoming flower growing within. "Nora, when you left, I couldn't just let that be the end. I felt a connection to you like none I'd ever experienced before. That's why I came here. I was, yet again, At loss of words, Xavier had a habit of leaving me tongue-tied. I stammered, trying to think of a quick response. Xavier sensed my hesitation, and he took another step forward. He was a mere foot away from me now, and my heartbeat began to quicken at his close proximity, at the warmth that radiated off his body. I watched his eyes momentarily glance down to the left side of my chest, and he smiled, probably because he knew how his close proximity was sending my heart into an attic beating. "Nora," he whispered in his low, velvety voice, and I fought against a shiver. "I know you feel what I feel. Our souls have a deep connection that no mortal can comprehend." His words sounded so foreign, but I couldn't deny the truth behind them even if I tried to. I did feel a sense of connection to his soul, one I'd never experienced before. And frankly, the fact that I was feeling so deep a connection to a person I knew nothing about scared me beyond the ordinary. "Xavier," I took a reluctant step backwards. I don't know. How could I trust someone that was friends with the right hand of the biggest mafia in North America? I couldn't. All I'm asking for is a chance. His shimmery silver gaze was pleading as he stared into my own hopefully. A sudden gush of wind swirled past us as the door to the cafe was closed behind some customers, and Xavier's old, familiar, addictive scent wafted through my senses. He smelt like the woods, and fresh rain. Those goddamned butterflies. "One chance?" Xavier asked once more. "Just lunch." It was true that I didn't know him, nor could I tell if he was trustworthy, but those emotions bursting from my heart and sending tingling sensations down to the ends of my fingertips were overwhelming me, speaking much louder than all the logical reasons my brain yelled at why I shouldn't agree to his offer. And then the words left my mouth before my brain could fully register them. Just lunch. Chapter 11. I slammed my front door shut behind me so violently that the sound continued to ring through my ears for a straight minute. From the corner of my eyes I saw Noah's tall build jump from his seat on my living room couch and take a defensive stance, his occupied hand pointing towards my way, and I found myself on the other end of my favorite red kitchen knife. "What the hell?" "Nora," he yelled angrily. Then he huffed and lowered the weapon in his hand. "What are you doing with my kitchen knife?" I questioned warily. He glanced down at his hand before a dark look crossed his features. "Did you forget already what your idiot of a friend did? Those men could be watching us right this moment, and we wouldn't even know it." He snapped a bit too harshly. Well, that took a dark turn. I wondered what his reaction would be if he found out I just agreed to a date with one of those men he was currently taking a stance against. "Here's your drink." I offered him the paper cup and looked around the living room. "Where's Ariel?" He gestured with his head back towards my bedroom. I rolled my eyes. Of course she would still be sleeping. I stalked towards my room, trying way too hard to walk normally and hide my excitement, to the point where it was obvious I wasn't normal. I glanced over my shoulder and was grateful to find Noah occupied sipping on his drink to notice my unusual behavior. I pulled open my bedroom door to see Ariel sprawled out on my bed diagonally. Her hair ruffled and spread out across the pillows as slight snores escaped her mouth. I slammed the door shut and rushed to the windows, pulling my curtains apart to let in the morning light. Immediately my action was followed by an annoyed groan, slamming the cups on the nightstand. I reached for the blanket and pulled it off of Ariel, forcing her to turn on her back. She sent me a death glare. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nogan, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nogan, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I clapped my hands together. "I need you to be fully alert because what I'm about to tell you could get the both of us killed." When her eyes widened like saucers, I clarified, "By Elliot." She gradually sat upright against the headboard. "What is going on?" she whispered. I pushed at her legs and sat down beside her, but when I opened my mouth to speak, no words came out. I didn't know how to begin. "Nora, what happened?" Ariel pushed. I leaned in and whispered, "You'll never guess who I ran into at the coffee shop." She sat upright, straightening her back and shoulders. "Now fully awake, who?" she shrieked, and I shushed her harshly, glancing at the door as if waiting for Noah to burst in any second. "Xavier." I finally whispered, and her blue eyes widened once more, her jaw dropping open now. I nodded my head violently, a big grin forcing its way on my face. And that's not all. Ariel gulped. There's more. Please don't tell me the whole gang showed up. A shudder ran down my spine at the mention of gang, which diverted my attention from what I was about to confess. I began speaking, but didn't know how to propel my word what I was about to ask. Ariel stared back at me expectantly. Do you believe Xavier has something to do with all that? What if he's not as close to Vincent as we thought he was? What if they're genuinely just friends? I hoped. I watched Ariel study me carefully, not knowing how to respond. She glanced down as she contemplated a reply, but when she looked up her mouth closed again. When she took too long to answer, I suddenly blurted out, "He asked me out." Her eyes widened, and I dropped the second bomb before she could respond. And I said yes. Nora, she all but yelled, scolding me, or at least I thought she was, until she broke out into a huge teeth-white grin, her dimples digging deep into her cheeks. I can't believe this. Why, you can't believe this. As in I am so disappointed in you. I can't believe this, or this is great. I can't believe this, I questioned. Her grin widened. This is fantastic. She squealed. I cringed back at her high-pitched voice. I whispered doubtfully. Ariel nodded her head frantically. I knew from the first moment you two met that there was a spark. I had never seen you so nervous around someone before. I felt a warm blush creeping up my cheek. Ariel gasped and jerked forward, clutching my hand tightly. "See, even now you're blushing." I rolled my eyes and pushed her hand away, rubbing my cheeks in hopes of them returning normal again. I'm not too sure I should trust him though. I mumbled, sighing. Ariel noticed my unease and shook her head. I have a good feeling about this guy. Remember my sixth sense? I chuckled and nodded yes. I don't think he's a bad guy. Dangerous, maybe, but not bad, she whispered. I frowned at her last sentence. What do you mean? Dangerous? She shrugged. They all looked very intimidating. I feel like there's a sense of danger surrounding them. But if they were the bad guys, you and I wouldn't have felt so comfortable around Vincent and Xavier. Which is why I was confused when Elliot took a stance against them. I nodded my head in agreement. That's exactly what I thought. The way I felt like I could be myself around Xavier was very confusing at first, given the fact that it takes a lot for me to trust a guy. So maybe he's a good man. And that's why the trigger warnings didn't go off in my mind. I justified. Ariel suddenly shrieked, and I flinched back, cursing her. So, when is this date? I slapped her arm and shushed her, pointing with my thumb back at the door, the only thing separating us from Noah. She bit the inside of her cheek, as if suddenly realizing that this date is something that should be kept a secret from our friends. Her eyes widened. How is this going to work? Slouching forward in early defeat. I've no idea. It will be extremely difficult. Noah, and especially Elliot, basically have radars pointed directly at girls now after what went down at the beach. We can say we're hanging out. Just you and me. And I can go to the movies. There's a new one I've been wanting to watch, Ariel suggested. I shook my head. They won't let us go alone. Not until things settle down a bit and their paranoia subsides. Ariel nodded, gazing off into the distance as she tried to think of another solution. A sudden feeling of frustration washed over me, and I frowned. You know what? They can't control who I can and cannot date. I snapped. Ariel's eyes shot up to mine and widened. Nora, she began, but I cut her off now. I dealt with the worst and survived. Xavier isn't a bad guy. I can date whoever I want. I hopped off my bed and stalked towards my closet, pulling the doors open to reveal my color coordinated fancy tops. Today, I felt yellow. I began rummaging through my yellow tops, settling for a fancy pastel V-neck, long-sleeved. Nora, you know they just worry a lot. Ariel's voice came from behind me. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noble, Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I know, and I'm grateful that they care. But I don't need them controlling who can and cannot be a part of my life, I explained. She nodded hesitantly and gave me a tight smile. Is the date today? Ariel asked, eyeing the top I picked appreciatively. That would look gorgeous with your hair curled. Would you do me the honor? She flashed me a toothy grin, jumping once and clapping her hands excitingly. I thought you'd never ask. She reached out and grabbed my shoulders, moving me to my vanity and pushing me down to sit in front of the mirror. I'll go freshen up and you can plug in the curler. I pulled open the desk drawer and took the curler out, doing as instructed by the beautician the whole while my stomach churning, not only in anticipation, but fear of getting caught by the people who instructed me to do the exact opposite of what I was going to do. Chapter 12. I didn't know where I was headed to nor what I was going to do. For the first time in what seems like forever, I have allowed my footsteps to be guided by my heart. I wandered aimlessly with no direction in my conscious mind, but somehow was positive I was headed the right way, because why else would my heart thump faster and my stomachs not tighten with every step I took? My forehead muscles were growing sore from being too constricted. I forced the frown off my face and relaxed my expression, not wanting to appear angry in front of the passerbies or worse in front of my date. It felt very odd saying it, even if it was just in my mind. The word brought back so many memories I would have rather left in my unconscious mind. Earlier this afternoon, Ariel had styled my hair to cascade down my back in natural waves. I had put on my outfit in no time, so eager for lunchtime, and as I stalked out of my bedroom with a newfound confidence, I noticed Noah was busy speaking on the phone. No, you need to get your ass here right now. I'm in desperate need of a shower. He was demanding to the other person across the line. His back was towards the hall as he faced my living room's balcony. I ignored my conscience as it pressured me to stay moral and inform him, the person who spent days in my apartment, guarding my friend and my found danger of where I was headed to. I bit my lip and continued straight towards my front door, my movement so light it almost looked like I was floating across the tiles. No, it's not okay, Noah suddenly yelled. And as soon as I recovered from my flinch, I hurried to lower the doorknob, hoping the slight creak would be balanced by the echo of Noah's voice. You know damn well how serious this situation is. Don't you dare tell me to calm down. I heard his volume decrease as I stepped further away from the door, the adrenaline pump rushing through my veins as I tried so sneakily not to get caught, distracted my mind from fully registering his words. It wasn't until I reached down the hall and stopped at the elevator that I realized just what I was getting into. Could David truly be just as dangerous as Vincent? My strong sixth sense that often distinguished between the good and the bad people wasn't going off in my head. From the moment I met Xavier, it had felt like I'd known him for years. Like we were long-lost souls finally coming together after an anguishing millennia. Nora. The sudden call startled me and I jumped a step forward. The elevator had ordained, indicating it had reached my floor. As the doors began spreading open, I turned around to find Noah's head peeking from my apartment's door. His eyes trailed over my appearance, the styled hair and the fancier than usual attire, and they settled back on my face. He stepped through the door and stood fully in the middle of the hallway, his eyebrows lifting in amusement and a slight grin coming to view. Where are you headed to, looking all dolled up? I opened my mouth to reply, but hesitated as I pondered over line. An inner voice reprimanded me, reminding me that Noah didn't deserve to be lied to, especially not by me. I have a date, I blurted out, in a speed quicker than I anticipated. The grin that had appeared so easily vanished from his face as it crumpled into a frown. A date. He pronounced the word like it felt so foreign leaving his mouth. With who? You don't know him? I rushed. Reaching out, I hit the elevator button to stop the doors from closing. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Noah. I'm already latent. The second I turned around to say goodbye, I found myself facing a broad chest. I stepped back and looked up into Noah's questioning stare. His frown now deepened as he glared me down. I felt so small standing below him, but I held my ground. Try me, what's his name? I clenched my jaw in annoyance, pushing at his chest with my index finger. First off, I pushed harder until he took one step back, his hands coming to rest on his hips. Personal space. Who is he? Nora, he asked again. Could you back off? I demanded, huffing. He took a literal step backwards, fully aware that's not what I meant. I need a break. Noah. His frown slowly turned into confusion. WHA, as in, I need you to back off, son. I clenched my fist by my side, forcing my rough persona on. I understand you don't mean harm, but your constant protection is starting to suffocate me. I need you to ease off a little and let me live on. His lips parted as he prepared to speak, but I immediately stepped through the elevator doors. Nora, are you sure? He hesitated, as if not knowing how to word his question properly. Maybe you should wait. Think this through. I know what I'm doing. An uncomfortable look flashed through his eyes, and he immediately lowered his gaze and looked away. I took that as my cue to hit the button for the lobby. The doors closed and I slowly inhaled a deep breath. The tough part was over with. As I strolled through the city, my eyes wandered over every restaurant, realizing how stupid I must have looked agreeing to a lunch date and never asking about the location. There were hundreds of restaurants in the neighborhood. How could I possibly know where to meet up? What if he wanted to leave the city? Did he plan to take us to a fancy restaurant or a casual diner? The possibilities were endless, and the inside of my cheek was getting more swollen by the minute as I continued to chew on it nervously. A sudden flash of black distracted me from where I was headed to, and I glanced sideways to see an all-black Range Rover slowing to a stop a few feet ahead of me. The windows were tinted to show the insides, but as the doors opened and a pair of long legs hugged by black jeans stepped out, I gulped. How could it ever fit in with such grandeur? Xavier turned to face me and pushed shut the front door of the SUV. My hand reached up and he took off his black sunglasses, revealing even in the fair distance among us his shimmering silver gaze. My heart leapt right out of my chest as his eyes locked on mine, and an inexplicable warmth spread through my veins. He wore a black shirt with a light beige jacket, a casual outfit that he pulled off so well. He began approaching me, and my feet moved forward on instinct to meet him halfway through. As he stopped a mere foot away, he flashed me a warm, earnest smile. "Hey," he greeted, and I smiled back in return, for a brief sec, and his eyes took in my appearance. And his smile widened. "Wow, you look," he began, but only trailed off. I prodded in curiosity. I heard a deep chuckle rumble in his chest, and he shook his head. Words wouldn't do justice. My neck began to warm up and I found myself too flustered to reply. He truly was the smoothest man I had ever come across. I wonder if he uses the same charming charisma with just everyone. Ready to go? Yeah. I nodded. Are we taking your car? We are. I hope you don't mind leaving the city. Nowhere too far. Going somewhere farther from the city sounded much better than staying within the borders. It meant a chance of being seen by any of my friends. As much as I hated lying to them, I had to do it at least until Noah and Elliot cooled off a bit. That sounds great, I announced with a smile. Xavier's grin widened in delight and he gestured towards his car. As I reached out to grab the door handle, his own hand outstretched and slightly bumped into mine. "Allow me." He pulled the door handle and opened the door, such chivalrous act. I had to resist the urge to chuckle nervously and I climbed in, whispering a quick thanks. The insides of the car were just as dark as its exterior. The black leather seats felt a bit chilly despite the warm summer air. Xavier climbed into the driver's seat not a minute later and buckled up. I copied his action. "So, where are we headed to?" I asked curiously. "It's just a small Italian restaurant by the border of this town. Their food's really good." He sneaked a glance at me from the corner of his eyes and I felt my excitement rise anew. "I love Italian food." I smiled cheerfully. "It's definitely my go-to." Xavier's grin widened. "Oh, it's my favorite." I nodded eagerly. A minute passed as Xavier continued driving very smoothly, and a random question suddenly popped in my head. "Xavier." I called for his attention. He hummed in question and glanced my way. How did you really find me? His expression turned stoic for a moment before returning to normal. I remembered you saying you're from Illinois. Well, yeah, but it's a pretty big state. I guess I just got lucky. A small smile tugging at his lips, but I couldn't bring myself to smile at his short response. My thoughts running wild as my paranoia resumed its place behind the wheel, driving my mind towards anxious thoughts. Xavier noticed my sudden silence and spared a quick look my way, his own eyes turning anxious. A good friend of mine recommended trying that coffee shop we met at this morning, since many locals hang out there, and the rest was simply good luck. He smiled genuinely. Fate must really like you. Then, to which he chuckled and nodded. Indeed, it does. For the rest of the drive we exchanged questions, learning more about one another. He asked about my passions and I asked about his. I learned that he really loves to read, especially classics, and we both happened to have a love for The Great Gatsby. His favorite color is black, which made sense since most of his belongings reflected that passion. I should have guessed it on my own. And he also owns a dog, a pit bull whose name is Ander. What about your family? I wondered, hoping to get to know him on a deeper level, not just the basics that anyone could know of. He trailed off as he swerved to a turn, his eyes looking over the passing cars to his left. I lost both my parents a long time ago, he finally replied. I bit the inside of my cheek, immediately regretting the choice of question. I'm sorry for your loss. Xavier shook his head, smiling sadly. Don't be. Everyone leaves eventually. Right. I probably should have changed the direction of our conversation then. But my damn curiosity wouldn't let it go. What were they like? I asked in a low voice, the more mature part of me hoping he wouldn't have heard the question, fearing it might upset him. But he stared ahead with a feint of a smile. They were wonderful people. They met when my dad was on a business trip, and my mom was by the dancing studio she practiced at. The classic glitch of accidentally bumping into one another and instantly falling in love. He chuckled and I found myself laughing as well. That's really cute. I was such a sucker for glitches. Xavier nodded, and the car gradually decelerated until it came to a halt. I gazed out the car window at the beautiful restaurant we were parked across from. Just as Xavier had said, it was a small restaurant, but the beauty of its decor blinded the onlookers to its adverse parts. There were white wooden tables set out front, with gorgeous bouquets of light pink roses set on the center of each. There were also fairy lights hanging above and over all the tables, giving a very homey and romantic feel to the place. I wondered how magical it would look at night. Well, I whispered, and Xavier sneaked a glance at the corner of his eye. I'm glad you like it. He began to switch off the ignition, and I didn't hesitate to undo my seatbelt. It's ours for the day. My head snapped to stare at him horridly the second his words registered in my brain. You reserved the entire restaurant for us. I gaped. That was way more than I had expected. The owner is a close acquaintance. She was generous enough to offer some privacy as a way of showing her joy that I'm finally going on a date. Xavier chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief at his friend's actions. But it was kind of cute, very nice of her. So he doesn't date often. Her and inner voice beamed. I had to fight the stupid grin creeping up my face. Xavier undid his seatbelt and opened the car door. I reached out from my side's handle and opened the door. And within that exact second, Xavier showed up to my side, taking over the action and opening my door the rest of the way. I gaped at him as he gestured with his hand for me to get out of the car. Wow, I breathed as I stepped out. You're fast. It probably sounded more of an accusation than a fact. When I didn't get a reply, I looked up at Xavier to see him staring down at me with an innocent smile, pretending like he hadn't even heard my comment. Chapter 13. The last ray of sunlight swaying across my right shoulder blade gradually began disappearing as another big fluff of cloud moved ahead of it. The sky was a cool shade of baby blue, with blotches of white clouds hovering only centimeters apart, just my type of day. I found myself often distracted with where I stepped foot as I kept sneaking glances at the sky every now and then, and Xavier had to regularly repeat the words, "Watch out." Our lunch had gone amazingly, My mushroom ravioli tasted so heavenly I had to resist the urge to groan with every bite. Xavier kept the conversation going, and I found him to be more interested in me than I was in his personal interest, which says a lot because I was madly absorbed in all that he is. However, to our disappointment, we finished our lunch early, so Xavier suggested dessert, but the place was too vacant that sitting there too long slowly turned us pleasing, and I suggested we go on a walk to have some ice cream instead. He answered back with a wide, pleased grin, and so we wandered around in the streets of an unknown town, our arms regularly brushing and magnifying the sparks flying in the space between. We stopped at a pastel green ice cream stand. Xavier got 2 scoops of mint chocolate and I got 2 of caramel, swirl our favorites. Tell me more about your job, Xavier said. It's incredible. Remembering all the chaotic fun we had at the company, it's like this small place packed with some of the most creative and crazy people that I have ever met. We have a lot of fun working on our projects. Xavier nodded. And when did you decide you wanted to become an artist? Ever since I was born. One of the very first things I learned to do was grab a pencil and draw. On literally anything. I chuckled, remembering all the mess I'd made back at my childhood home, drawing swirls across walls and tables. My parents always told me I was a natural, so I decided to pursue a career in arts. I looked up to witness Xavier's response, and in that moment a flicker of black distracted me from the warm smile playing on his lips. I peeked over his broad shoulder to see a black car with dark, tinted windows pass by, driving uncommonly slow. My eyebrows furrowed. This was their 3rd trip around. Nora, my eyes snapped to Xavier's questioning eyes. Is everything all right? I contemplated telling him about the car. A small part of me worried he might think I'm an overthinker, which isn't exactly a charming trait, but another part of me wondered if perhaps it would matter to him to know if we were being followed. But then again, why would we be followed? Nora, he pushed, now stopping in his tracks and turning to face me. I glanced over Xavier's shoulder at the car to see that it also stopped a few feet behind, mimicking our action. Now, that was really suspicious. I think there's a car following us. The intended statement came out more like a question. To where agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. He was suddenly alert, his back involuntarily straightening and his shoulders pushing back. I raised my eyebrows and motioned to the car behind him, and he caught on. Xavier casually reached out for my upper arms, his hold firm enough that I could feel the warmth of his hands creeping over my blouse, and he slowly circled us around so that we switched positions without making it obvious. His long fingers brushed a strand of hair away from my cheek, tucking it gently behind my ear in a loving motion. For a second, I almost forgot it was all for show. His eyes suddenly turned cold as he looked over my head, but a minute later, they softened as he broke into a relieved smile. I stared at him in confusion. No worries. That's just Levi, he assured me. Levi. The name sounded familiar but couldn't put a face to it. He was with us at the lake. The memories clicked into place and I remembered the 3rd person that hovered behind Xavier and Vincent during our trip. Too quiet to gain the attention of the group. However, he did get along with Seth pretty fine. Oh, I remember. I nodded, but that still didn't answer my question. Why is he following us? To my agent extraordinaire, webnovel. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Just precaution. Xavier started walking the same way we were headed to before I spotted the car. What for? Following behind his steps? Nothing in particular. Just making sure we're safe. He glanced down at me and smiled. That was awfully weird. I laughed lightly, nervously. Do you often have men following you around for safety measure? Xavier must have sensed my unease, because he looked down at me and his stare lingered on my facial expression, searching behind my eyes for an answer to his open question. No, not that often, but it has seemed like the right thing to do. To which only increased my confusion. Xavier's eyes moved to the small black purse that fell by my left hip, and his eyebrows furrowed. Someone's been texting you. You might want to get that. I stared at my purse with a dumbfounded expression. Had I grown that oblivious to the outside world? The vibration feature of my receiving text messages usually annoys me so much that I immediately reply to them to stop the buzzing. But I hadn't even felt it this time. I tried to balance the medium-sized ice cream cup in my uncommonly small palm. As I fished for my phone with my unoccupied hand, Xavier immediately noticed my struggle. He smiled and reached out for my cup. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilburn. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Let me have that. I flashed him an appreciative smile and went to grab my phone. To my complete horror, I had over 3 missed calls and up to 19 text messages. But to no surprise, they were all from Ariel. I clicked on the text messages first to see her ranting in all caps lock about how she was so close to throwing punches around because Elliot and Noah were pushing at her buttons. Eventually, the texts began turning more frantic as she demanded I return home immediately. I exhaled deeply in annoyance, not really wanting to end Xavier and I's date just yet. But Ariel was freaking out and I had to make it back before she'd lose her patience and cause an even bigger fuss. Is everything all right? Xavier asked. I shook my head, forcing on a tight smile which must have come out as a grimace. I should go back. I refrained from giving any further detail, not wanting to ruin our explaining the whole ordeal, which as a matter of fact might take over hours to cover. Thankfully, Xavier didn't question it any further and simply nodded in understanding, switching directions as we headed back to the restaurant where he parked his car. I retrieved my ice cream cup when he offered, but I found myself in no mood to finish the delicious dessert, so I carried it numbly all the way back. You'd tell me if something was wrong. Right. Xavier spoke suddenly. I was so lost in my thoughts wondering what was the deal with my friends was that for a second I forgot he was walking right beside me. My eyes snapped up to his and it took a couple seconds to long for his words to register in my brain. Yes, of course, I admitted. Truthfully, I didn't know why, but I would have told him if something were to go wrong. There was a whole part of me that felt so safe and secure in his presence, fully aware that we barely even knew him, that it would blindly trust and follow him around with no question or hesitation. And to be completely honest, that feeling scared me beyond the norm. I didn't want to be just another dumb girl in love, but sometimes, I guess you can't control who your soul wants to attach itself to. Xavier stopped walking, and like the dumb girl in love that I was fighting so hard not to become, I fought his action. His captivating silver eyes gazed deep into my plain brown ones, and I was so staggered by their striking brilliance. My mind went blank for a fair minute, wondering whether there were other lucky ones born into this world with eyes so enchanting they could melt the most inanimate. Nora, his lips spoke my name, and it broke me out of the spell his eyes held me under. You can trust me to keep you safe. I nodded subconsciously, mindlessly agreeing to his words even before they fully register in my brain. My phone buzzed again. Xavier's eyes moved down to the palm of my hand, sweaty and difficultly grasping onto my phone. We should probably move if you want to make it back soon. The traffic is unbearable at this time of day. He turned around and started towards his car. I looked at the screen on my mobile, and Elliot's name flashed in wide letter. I clicked open his text message. It asked me where I was. I rolled my eyes infuriatingly. They need to seriously stop treating me as if I'm a child. I'm 23, for God's sake, perfectly capable of living independently. Shoving my phone back into my purse, I marched angrily the rest of the way to the car. Eyebrows furrowed and a clear annoyance showing through my facial expression. Xavier was already in the car with its engine running. I hopped into the passenger seat and offered him a smile, to which he reciprocated before preparing for our return back to the main city. I really regret ending the day so soon. I was having a lot of fun, I commented. He hummed in agreement. Me too, but there's always next time. He glanced at me and gave a small grin, which accelerated my heartbeat up a notch or two. What would you like to do next time? His smile widened. Only then did I notice I was still holding onto my ice cream cup, as its exterior began to dampen and cool the palm of my hand. and what little was left within gradually melted completely. "Oh," I groaned, noticing small droplets of water falling onto my pants and leaving dark stains behind. With my other hand, I fumbled with my purse as I tried to extract the small pocket tissue I always brought with me for this exact form of clumsiness. Growing frustrated by the minute, I roughly yanked out a tissue and instantly tapped it against my palm, then the slightly dampened spots on my jeans. "All good," Xavier suddenly chuckled, and I rolled my eyes, covering my embarrassment with feigned annoyance. I announced, resisting a smile. A couple seconds later, he questioned, "So?" I looked at him in confusion. He read my expression and repeated his earlier question. "Where would you like to go to next time?" My heart gave a little flutter, thinking there was going to be a next time, and that even if our day was about to end, that didn't mean it was the last I'll see of him. I smiled subconsciously, idiotically, and a warm blush started creeping up my cheeks as I suddenly realized how crazy attached I was getting to him. "Done, girl, in love," a fierce inner voice hissed at me. I told her to shut up. "Anywhere you'd like," I finally answered. Xavier shook his head in disapproval. This time, I chose a restaurant that held a special place in my life. "Next time, we'll go to a place that holds the same meaning to you. This way we can explore more of one another." He peered over to capture my reaction, which I bet was incomplete. "Fair enough," I agreed, "but I'll have to think about it. There's too many to choose from." He nodded once in understanding. "And we'll make time for all of them," he promised. I beamed. Xavier began to slow the car to a stop, and when I glanced outside the window, I noticed to my utter disappointment that we were parked across my apartment building. I guess good times always come to an end. I turned in my seat to thank Xavier for the lovely lunch date, only to witness the same look of disappointment and longing swirling in his striking silvers. It warmed my heart but also pulled at its cords, seeing him so unready to let go. I gave him a genuine smile, and watched the blur behind his eyes vanish as they immediately turned soft, and he offered me his own breathtaking smile. It was a true pleasure. "Nora, I'm looking forward to our next date," he confessed. My cheeks grew warm as I imagined the flow of blood rushing upwards, dispersing across my face to clearly reveal just how flustered his words made me feel. "See you next time, Xavier. Thank you for the lovely day out." I reached for the handle and pushed the car door open, stepping down and waving goodbye. I crossed the street towards my apartment building, but before passing through the front doors, I turned to give one last smile to Xavier, to which he replied with a faint nod. I stalked into the building and immediately threw the already melted ice cream away, pushing on the elevator button and waiting for it to reach the lobby. As I got in and waited for it to take me to my floor, my thoughts returned to Ariel's text messages from earlier. I wondered what she told them about my sudden and unannounced date. Checking my watch, I calculated the hours I'd spent on the date, nearly 3. The elevator doors dinged and I stepped out, stalking towards my apartment door. I stopped for a second to inhale deeply, mentally preparing myself for the complaints that were sure to come my way. I tried the door before reaching for my keys, knowing my friends never locked the doors behind them, and truly found it to be unlocked, so I pushed it and walked in. Noah and Elliot were seated on one of my living room couches, scowling as they stared at the TV. Ariel was nowhere in sight. I slammed the door a little too harshly to gain their attention. "I'm home," I announced to the party. Elliot and Noah spared no second of hesitation as they jumped off their seats and instantly bombarded me with questions. "Why didn't you reply to my text? What sort of date takes for hours?" I interjected. "Why didn't you tell us earlier that you had a date? And who was it with?" "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilbe. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." I groaned in annoyance, so loudly and obnoxiously, it ended up sounding like an animal howling in despair. "Would you ease off?" "Hey, back off." Ariel's shriek came from the hallway leading to the rooms as she came stalking out, her hair ruffled up into a messy bun, and her pointy index finger directed at Elliot and Noah. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. You stay the hell out of it, Elliot warned, his face turning a light shade of pink. I gulped. That rarely ever happened. If you didn't want me to be involved in this, then you shouldn't have been all up my ass for the past 3 goddamned hours. My head is still pounding from all that interrogation. Her arms crossed over her chest in annoyance. Elliot pinched the area between his eyes, a sign that a bad migraine was on its way, which resulted more often than not from arguing with Ariel. I could only imagine how bad it must have been if Ariel was telling the truth about it going on for 3 hours. Nora, may I just know something? Elliot finally asked, his voice lowering an octave as a sign of weariness. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Who is he? You don't know him, I answered curtly, which was somewhat true. They didn't know the real Xavier. You don't know that. Just give me a name. He pushed. I huffed and threw my arms up in frustration. I went on 1 date. Just 1. I don't need to inform you guys of every single thing that I do. Yes, you do. Elliot's voice raised, which was an evident surprise to all as they instantly stopped whatever they were doing and just stared. You will tell me everything you do and whoever you meet with, because now all our lives are at risk. Not just your own. Oh, please. Nobody wants shit to do with you. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Ariel spat harshly. I would never put you guys in harm's way. I seethed through clenched teeth, more angry than hurt that he thinks so low of me. Of course we know that. Nora. Noah spoke. He glared at Elliot angrily. He didn't mean that. Elliot rubbed his forehead, pacing around the living room with a clenched jaw. History would never repeat itself. Elliot, I snapped. And even if it does, rest assured you will be kept as far away from danger as possible. Elliot stopped his pacing and turned around in disbelief. Nor he began speaking, but I spared him no more second, feeling an inner wall crumbling in my chest as it got heavier by the minute. I turned around abruptly and yanked the front door open, racing straight out and heading to nowhere.